back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I'm Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, Act Two is a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This podcast is one of the things we do. Thank you for joining us here. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast. That way you don't miss out on our cool topics. Like last week's where we had a physical therapist on.
Who I just saw, by the way.
How is she?
It's fantastic.
Our best friend Melody.
Yeah, I'm a little worried. There's like a little side friendship going on here.
I was gonna say, did she ask about me?
She kind of did.
If you would like to suggest a topic for us to talk about, a burning question you've had about screenwriting or something that's going on with your own life, or if you have additional questions on any of our topics, please reach out to us at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out on our Instagram and Twitter at ActTwoWriters. I'm Story Thursday on Instagram and Tasha 3.0 on Twitter at Blue Sky.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram. Boom.
I'd like to say that the child who lives above me, whom our listeners have nicknamed Damien, is quite active tonight.
Good.
So I just want to, throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm happy he's active.
He's getting his little steps in. All right. We have a big topic.
Yeah,
and
we do.
I want to give us time to get into it. However, there's something I want to talk about in This Week in Writing. Do you have any?
There's just one thing I want to talk about.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
This Week in Writing.
I saw something on social media.
Uh-oh.
It was a post from Lin-Manuel Miranda,
Okay.
creator of Hamilton, the maker
Yes.
of great music from Encanto, Moana. Not Moana 2,
Clearly, yes.
but Mufasa. And he posted something that was a letter from Stephen Sondheim, who is one of the all-time great lyricists and composers in Broadway history, who did things like West Side Story and
Company?
Into the Woods Company. And, I mean, he's a legend. So, the reason I'm bringing this up is Lin-Manuel posted a email exchange that was going on between them, and Lin-Manuel had sent him Hamilton in the early phases of Hamilton. And we'll link this so people can read it. But basically, Sondheim got back and was like, I love this musical. I love your direction. He's completely supportive. He said, however, I'm kind of summarizing this, is he was like, essentially he said he didn't feel like there was a theme. And he was like, this is beyond just like the music. This is like, what do you feel about Alexander Hamilton? Like, what is it that you are trying to say? And what is this message? And it was really crazy because, even in Broadway, which is so obvious, but it was like, he was just telling him, he's like, get to the theme. That's how I read this. It was like, get to the theme and don't just make this about the music. It's like, what's your thesis moving forward, essentially?
Yeah.
So that was it.
Love that.
And I just wanted to bring it up because it was beautiful. And I read it and I think it really resonates with screenwriters and all creatives. It's great.
Can you post that with the podcast or on our socials?
I absolutely will.
Okay. Well, mine's not as cool. Mine seems lame now.
No, please. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, sorry about that, Tasha. You want to say something about whatever you have to say?
All right. So I'm working on a pitch that I want to take to a studio, Disney specifically. And in breaking this story, I have been writing a new kind of document, at least for me. I feel like I told you about it and you were like, yeah, I've been doing that my whole life, Tasha. But for me, it's new. So I just wanted to share that I've been brainstorming what the story is, what the structure is, what this character is going after, what her arc is going to be, and really just like the story beats. And I don't know a lot of it. And usually I get crippled by the fact that I don't know things. And so I just don't write it. Or I wait to write it until I do know all the things. But I got into Word. Well, I use Pages. I got into Pages and I just wrote what I knew. And then when I stopped knowing things, I just put in italics, I don't know what happens here, but I want this to happen. Like, I know that I want my character to go from feeling this way to now feeling this way. And I know I want her to go from literally being in this location to being in this other location and to confront this new thing. I have no idea what the tasks along the way are for her to get to that point. And I know there are multiple ones. I just know where she needs to go. And I just put that there. And then I put also some like questions that I had that I wanted to think about for that. Like, for example, I know she needs to go from this location to this location and face this obstacle or like overcome this obstacle, because I knew that she needed to change by the time she got to point B in a way that I understood. And so my questions might be, what are things that would help change someone to make them become more brave, for example? What is a good set piece here that could take place on the water? Because I know she'll be crossing the water to go do this. Like, they were these kinds of questions, and then I can now give them to someone like Josh, and there's specificity there in the question. So when he reads it and he comes to writer's group, he can be like, I got some good obstacles for you that can take place on the water that can also serve a purpose of letting her learn how to be brave. And it's so helpful because, again, I would just get so paralyzed if I didn't have all the answers, and now I feel free. I feel free.
I'm happy you brought this up, actually, and we didn't just not talk about this, because this is actually one of my favorite things. And I was thinking about this. We are very fortunate that we are in a writer's group. Not everyone has that luxury. We're very fortunate that we have reps that we can bounce things off of. Not everyone has that luxury. And I'm bringing this up because, number one, when it's in writer's group, it's so helpful to lay out everything you just said. And I've done it a million times of like, not sure what happens here, let's discuss. And then it just jumps into the next scene, and because I know it's kind of going somewhere, and then we discuss it. But it's still very helpful if you're just kind of by yourself to write it out and see it and just be like, here are my options. This is where this could go. It's like choose your own adventure. This is where the story's headed. You don't have to write everything out, even though every single time people write, they think it's going to be the final product, which is not. So just write stuff down. Don't be precious.
I think so. And I'm so much further along doing this than I would have been otherwise. Because what I would have done is wait and wait and wait until I figured it all out. And then you wouldn't see a draft of anything until, I don't know, a couple months from now. And you're probably going to see something much sooner that just is kind of rough like this.
Yeah, well, what did Stephen Sondheim say about this?
Find your reason d'etre.
It's a great post.
Well, I can't wait to see it. All right, on to our main topic, which is, where do you start your story and what to do when you do have your starting point? So this topic came to me last week when I was talking to some writers in a writer's room, and we could tell that based on the way that we talk about story, that we probably start our own stories and our own original ideas in very different places. And one writer said that he started with location, and I was boggled by that. But he said, like, he knew where his movie was going to be set, and that was always like the first thing that came to his head, meaning like a literal location, like Las Vegas in the 1950s. Or it could be a world like 18th century Chinese piracy, or the Hong Kong mob underground, whatever, location. And then another writer chimed in, and she's like, I also start from location. And I was like, where do I start? And this writer turned to me and she said, you start from character, I can tell. And I was like, yes, actually, I think I do, because in many ways, I kind of don't care about certain world pieces, which is very weird as someone who is a world builder, really enjoys world building and is known for it. Like, those almost like I don't care. Like, I'll figure that out, right? Like, that's never my starting point. Whereas these writers felt that they needed to create the location and the world kind of completely before they could even think about character.
Which is crazy. I agree. I understand it, but I also don't start there. So I have to kind of like work to start there.
Yes, agree. So we're going to start talking about starting points, and our first episode, today's episode, is going to be about kind of getting in the weeds a little bit on if you're the kind of writer who starts with location as their starting point for stories. And I want to start with a question, Joshua.
Yes.
Have there been any scripts of yours that started with a location?
So before I answer that, I want to just elaborate on one thing you said.
Yeah.
Is that we are definitely going to be doing other starting points with other aspects like character or, if it's a concept, location, whatever it is, because I feel like this is important and everyone has their own starting point. I
Their
feel like
brain
we're
works
going to
totally different.
brain works differently. So we're going to dive into this. Okay. So back to your question. Have I had anything that starts with a location?
Yeah. Any of your ideas that came to you first as a location?
Yes.
Go on.
One thing, and I'm actually working on it right now. It's in the woods. And it was because I'm not even 100% sure if it might have started with character. I'm pretty sure it started location. And this was an idea that's been in my mind for quite some time. And I basically kind of thought to myself, all right, I want to set something in the woods and do something in there. And I think it was budgetary purposes as well. And also like a challenge to be like, okay, I want to set something here. And I worked backwards and had some thoughts. And that's how it all started, in the woods.
Do you remember what your first step was after that?
I think it was like, well, what kind of story would I want to tell in the woods?
Yes.
And then it just goes back to my normal thought process of like, well, there could be a good father-daughter relationship, good this, that, and then it's kind of going into the things and elements that I kind of want to tell. And I'm kind of engineering a story, not forcing it, by the way, but just kind of figuring this out. And it's like, does this work? And if it lines up, then we're good. Then we're off and running.
The does this work question is so important, I think, because you and I and pretty much every writer out there has topics, themes that they find personal to them, that they want to talk about. This might be the reason that they write, to your Stephen Sondheim point. And sometimes those things, father-daughter story, might not fit in the woods. It might not make sense to, I don't know why, but it wouldn't sometimes make sense to set that story in the woods, on an airplane, wherever. And you got to pick new characters. But a nice starting point is, well, I always want to tell a mother-daughter story. Is this my chance? If I just have a blank slate at a location, is this my chance to finally tell that thing that's been burning in my soul? And sometimes it doesn't fit and sometimes it does. So that is the cool thing about starting with location.
So now I'm going to throw it back to you. Mm-hmm. Have you started with location?
If I have, it's never gone anywhere.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is the thing that we just worked on, did we start with location?
No. We started with a concept.
Okay.
Just to explain it a little bit, our location is extremely important in the murder mystery story that Josh and I just wrote. But it wasn't the first thing. It was like part of the concept. So, I'm going to start from the top of ways that if I was starting from a location, how I would build a story off of just the idea of a location. And Josh, I want you to chime in with like how you might have done it at this stage, or if this makes sense with what you're doing. Like with your woods story. So
yeah, you're fired up. I see it in your eyes.
I got a lot to talk about. Okay, for example, night at the museum. I don't think I am a location person because I don't think I walk into the Natural History Museum and think, man, it'd be cool to set a story in here. I don't think the place would inspire me that way. I think I love being there. and it inspires me in general, but it doesn't necessarily make me think I would love to set a story in the Natural History Museum. I think what I would do instead is, man, how crazy would it be if like all these creepy cool exhibits came to life at night? Yeah. I often have this feeling, maybe after watching the movie Mannequin, I don't know, from the 80s. I love places like IKEA or huge department stores or like the Bass Pro Shop, where I think, man, how crazy would it be to be like locked up in here at night and get to spend the night in this place? So the location inspires me that way, but only because it automatically creates a situation for me in my head.
When we were discussing and getting ready for this, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, is that technically the start? Like, because I'm the exact same way. And we message each other all the time. If you're in some location, you're like, oh my God, what if this happened in here? And if you wouldn't have thought of it if you weren't there, but it's a concept first. It's not like I need to set something inside of a Target. That's just where this is going to be.
Right. I don't know what the story is. I don't know what the concept is, but it's definitely Target.
This is why travel's so important, on a side note. But anyway,
that's very true. That's very true. I mean, I just sent you an article today that is like, I could see writing a story about this, and it's a location, but it's a concept within a location. It's not just the location. And I don't think if I had just sent you, oh, look, there's this location in the middle of nowhere, that I would be inspired or understand what the story was there. Okay, but take me out of it, because we're not talking about me. We're talking about people who do start with location. So how do you start your story if your brain does go to, man, it would be cool to set a story in the Natural History Museum or in an IKEA? How do you mine a story from a location starting point? And I think first, you think about why that place has inspired you. What about it makes you excited? Makes you think a movie set here would be absolutely amazing. What is cool about this place to you? And that's special because it's coming from your point of view. And I think we forget, or we maybe take for granted, that we have our own unique point of view on something.
Yeah.
So why is it cool to you? And write those down on your whiteboard or on your sketch pad, like we've been talking about. Does the location scare you, for example? Does it make you wonder what's going on in the hallways that's not in public view? Does it tap into childlike wonder for you? What does this place inspire in you? And then, from that list of ways that that place has made you feel, what does that list now make you think of? So if it's childlike wonder that you felt in that place, ask yourself why. What would a child ask or wonder about in this place? Why did it inspire that sense of childlike wonder? Like, for example, if you went to the Hershey's Chocolate Factory, which is apparently a real place out here back east, and
wait. Apparently.
I didn't know. I mean, I've been to Vegas and there's like the M&M factory, but I didn't realize there's like a real, you can go make your own chocolate bar.
Yeah, of course.
I didn't know.
It's like a brewery.
So let's say you go to the Hershey's Chocolate Factory. You love the place, you don't know why, and then you write down, it reminds me of my childhood, or it makes me feel like anything is possible. I can make my own chocolate bar, right?
Yeah.
From there, you may eventually get to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
But unless you start tapping into the why of what you felt at that location, what ideas came to you at that moment, what did it make you feel, you won't be able to get to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
Another example is maybe the Natural History Museum in New York scared you. So for Josh, I feel like he walks into that place and he thinks childlike sense of wonder, possibility. For me, it scares the shit out of me. So from the list that we're talking about here, where after we go to a location, we write down what we thought of when we were there or what we felt, I will come up with a horror movie because it scared me. Josh will come up with Night at the Museum because it inspired him in a different way. So that's why this list is so important.
I love it.
I love it too. Okay, so start with what that location made you feel. And then I think equally important, why did it make you feel that way? And as you can see from how I'm talking, this is the general rule for kind of all of these story weigh-ins that we're going to talk about. Character, theme, scenario. When we start to get into those, it's kind of the same basic principle where you start big and you start whittling down to something small, and you're whittling down to that essence. What Sondheim said, right? Like, find the thing that you care about. All the other stuff, the music and everything in Hamilton, it's gonna work and it's gonna fit in, but unless you're writing to something, an essence that only you can see and only you can articulate in your special way, it's not gonna be about anything.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we come up with an idea. It is a flash of an inspiration, and it is extremely vague. It's extremely nebulous. And at that stage, I think of it like almost like a dream, where if you don't poke and prod and like drill it down now, it's going to just disappear like this wisp of something you once thought about at one point. You're always texting me something or telling me something over, before this podcast starts, and I'm like, you better write that down. Because I want to see that movie, and if you don't write that down, it's going to get lost. And I feel like you don't listen to me. I feel like there's so many ideas that are gone.
I know. I get so mad at myself too, because I'm such a firm believer of like, if it's a good idea, it's going to stick around in your brain. And then, so sometimes it's like a test of like, I'm not going to write this down. But then you forget to write it down. I get so mad at myself.
You son of a bitch.
I know. It's terrible. Anyway.
I know. I forgot that's your philosophy.
It's terrible.
Okay, sticking with the Natural History Museum idea. Okay, that would be a great location for a story. Why? What did that place make me feel? It made me feel excitement, wonder, possibility. I felt like a kid again. I felt curiosity. I wanted to know more about the exhibits than just what was on those little plaques. Maybe some of the exhibits were scary looking. Some of the exhibits looked real. Maybe the caveman exhibit made me wonder what they were thinking or what life would be like back then. And these are all examples of literally the list you would make. Excitement, wonder, possibility. Caveman exhibit made me wonder what they were thinking. Just put this on a list. Just write. And keep going until you're done. And now that I have this list, I can start asking what if questions about those things. So, what if I could know more about the exhibits than just what was written on the plaque? What would be a fun way to do that? Or those exhibits looked real. What if they were real? What if that caveman could just tell me what he was thinking and what life was like back then because I'm wondering it? So do these little what if questions for every little piece of your list and do multiple what ifs. And then you're just brainstorming now. You're not narrowing anything down. It's just throwing shit on your sketchboard or sketchpad and whiteboard.
I want to throw one more what if in there.
Please do.
I feel not, maybe it's not a what if, but in this process that you just marked, I feel like in a location like the Natural History Museum, there are certain things that you have to use. It's like Chekhov's gun. It's like, oh, there's a T-Rex in there. Yeah, you're going to have to somehow incorporate a T-Rex. You just have to. There's no way around it. You just have to. So I would say if there's something that you're doing where you're setting a location, I don't mean to step on your toes, but if you're like, I want to set something in the ocean, you got to have a shark involved. I mean, there's like, there's just
the
no way
dangers
around
of
it.
the ocean. You're definitely there's going to be a storm.
Yeah.
There's going to be all the obstacles that should come with.
It's not a shark. There's danger. There's the unseen element of it. So I guess what I'm just adding on is while you're looking at these different elements within a location, it's what are the things that you just have to have, unavoidable.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think there's no way. I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah. Start adding these to your list. Do a separate column. You know, if this is your how did it make me feel list, there's another thing of like things that has to take place at this location. Mm-hmm. If it's a theme park, you got to go on a ride. A ride maybe breaks down. Maybe. Doesn't have to, but maybe. And just start throwing things on the wall. So before you know it, the more you ask these what if questions to your own questions, right? To the things, the what if questions to the things that you are feeling. What if that caveman could just tell me what he was thinking? What if his exhibit came to life? Suddenly your location starts to become half of a concept. And I say half of a concept because exhibits came to life, and then what? The then what is the second half of your concept, right? Because at that point, again, I could write, what if the exhibits came to life and killed everyone? But Josh could write, what if the exhibits came to life every night when the museum closed and there was an adventure? So there's still multiple movies out there. You don't quite have a concept yet, right? Concept. But you still don't also have a character in that concept. And I think that's where some of this deeper work starts to take place. So now, at this point in the process, we have, what if the exhibits came to life every night when the museum closed? We're going to stick with the Josh version of this, the adventure version. So if the exhibits came to life every night when the museum closed, well, then what? Again, this could go in a million different directions, right? We have to narrow it down until we come up with a story and a full concept. So some people, I'm naming myself, might want to just jump right into plot or story right now. You know, like maybe it's about a Roman general figurine who's made fun of by all the other exhibits, and so he goes on this adventure until he's respected. Or maybe it's about the cowboy figurine, and he realizes that he's just one figurine and there's a huge world outside and he has an existential crisis. Or it could be a Toy Story type story. There's so many different options at this point, and it can be overwhelming and you could stop writing entirely. So to me, I think what you can still do at this stage is still narrow things down, pin things down to the wall. So I think a stronger way forward here to set yourself up for success is you've developed your concept from what's cool about your location. This to me is when I think you start thinking about theme and character. And I say them together because I think those two often go hand in hand in terms of the thought process. So that's kind of the next stage forward. So to start developing the location concept into theme and character, I'd start asking things like, why is this concept interesting to me in general? Why is it exciting at all that these figurines come to life every night? I need to figure out who and what I'm caring about. So, okay, it's interesting because exhibits don't come to life in real life. So there's wish fulfillment in getting to see them come to life. I'm putting this on the list. Another thing I might put on the list. It's interesting because we can learn firsthand about the people that the museum represents, a sort of untold history of everything. That's pretty cool. It's also cool that they can tell us what really happened to them. It's also cool because it would be utter chaos, and that can be really fun in this location. It's also cool that they can only live like at night. They don't live in the daytime, and that's really interesting. That creates interesting obstacles and complexities of personality. I think what's also cool is that no one gets to see them. So it becomes this kind of cool secret shrouded in mystery that adds mystique and wonder to something that I can go visit in real life. And that's pretty fucking cool. So all these things are going on the list. You mentioned the T-Rex. The T-Rex goes on the list. It'd be fucking cool to see a T-Rex come to life at night. That goes on the list because it's fucking cool. And cool shit should go on your list. 100%. You want your movie to be cool and enjoyed, right?
Yeah.
Well, now it's starting to become clear that what's most cool about this concept is actually my point of view as a normal person going into that world, right? It's what's coolest about this idea is not getting to be a wax figurine that turns into a person at night. I think what's cool to me is that based on this list that I'm making, it would be cool to witness something like that, to be let in on that secret, to feel special that way. That would be super fucking cool. All right, so now I know I'm going to need a character who's not a museum exhibit, who then comes upon the museum exhibit that comes alive at night. So now I have a character just from making a list. It's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
And with that character, I can start digging into theme.
I was going to say, I think this is actually the most important part because now you're getting into POV or your point of view of what this museum is. And then you're about to touch on this, I think. But I think this just led to the most important part of all of these kind of stories is like, well, what's our point of view? What's my point of view moving into this realm that really hasn't been explored quite yet?
Yes. And by the way, the coolest point of view on your list might be from the wax figurines point of view. And that's fucking great. Go and write your version of what that is. It's because it's not the thing that they came up with that night at the museum, which means it's personally yours. And that's what's so cool about writers and writing. But doing this list will get you to figure out the point of view that you find the most interesting so that you can find your character way in. Okay, so now we have at least an idea of my character as a normal person who comes into the museum and witnesses the craziness of all of these exhibits coming to life at night. And now I can start digging into theme. And this is absolutely my favorite part of the process. So I have my world, Natural History Museum, my concept, exhibits come to life at night, and the beginnings of a character, a real person who witnesses the exhibits come to life. Okay, here's where I would start with just a couple questions. What about this world and this concept I've created can be reflected in a character? So if this world I'm imagining is really fun, it's about the wish fulfillment of the kid that's in all of us, then is it a protagonist who doesn't know how to have fun? And that's what he has to learn? It's also about the exhibits that can teach you something, right? That was on my original list. It'd be so cool to learn the true untold history behind these exhibits beyond just the little plaque in the museum. Okay, so if this is about the exhibits teaching me something that I wouldn't otherwise know, what can they teach my protagonist? Clearly, my protagonist must have something to learn then. They need somewhere to grow. What would that lesson be? And if I'm learning a lesson through these wise historical figures, what is my protagonist missing that someone like that, someone with knowledge and wisdom and experience can provide them? I start asking these questions, writing them down. So now the starting point of my protagonist probably doesn't have a lot of or any of those things that the journey itself is going to provide, right? So if they need a knowledgeable, wise, experienced, sage historical figure that they're going to find at the museum, then maybe their starting point is the exact opposite. Maybe they are immature. Maybe they are irresponsible. So this theme has emerged of an irresponsible person who's immature as their starting point. Great. Is that a story that I want to tell? Where, someone becomes or goes from irresponsible to responsible. Now, I personally, as Tasha, have dealt with a lot of irresponsible people in my life and have fantasized about them being responsible. So is that enough of a theme that I will care about it for the months it's going to take for me to write this, right? That's another important piece I want to remind people is don't land on a theme because it seems to fit. land on a theme because you care about it, right? Is that a topic that I have something to say about? Or is that something I can't even relate to? If it's something I can't relate to, pick a different thing, make a new list. And I think this is where it becomes this fun intellectual exercise more than crafting structure or story or plot or anything, because now we're in thinking really about the psychology of character and the psychology of themes. So at this stage, I'm writing things on the board or on my sketch pad about irresponsible people. They are like this. They do this. They behave this way. Maybe I have a personal story about an irresponsible person, how they've negatively affected my life, something that I wish they would learn. This is a new list that I'm making. Now that I've landed on the arc being irresponsible to responsible, now I can start making a list about what that means to me. I would definitely put down why I think a person who is responsible did an irresponsible thing. Thinking about my own life, right? Thinking about examples in my own life where someone was irresponsible and why did they do that irresponsible thing? Is it because they were afraid of something? Is it because their parents were irresponsible and taught them terrible tools? What is the psychology of being irresponsible? And the reason why I'm talking about this is because I'm going to need to know the psychology of my character if that is his starting point. So really start digging into where this theme has exhibited in your own life and what conclusions you have or would like to make about this idea. This is going to be key to how I get you, the audience, to empathize or at least sympathize with my character, especially if the character starts crappy. It's harder.
Yeah. Well, it's so important because you need, obviously, the audience on the side of the character. You need them. But once you offer your point of view and you start understanding as a reader or a viewer of like, oh, this is why that person's like that, you've done it because now you're on their side and you're like, well, yeah, they're bad, but it's because this, and this. It's not their fault. It's not this, and it's.
Yeah, so key. Okay, so as I begin to build this part out and I ask those questions, I'm starting to really flesh out who my protagonist is at the start of the movie. What started as just a general idea of their arc, irresponsible to responsible, has now started to take on some kind of shape of who they are when we first meet them, because they're at the beginning of that arc, right? They are the worst version of themselves when we first meet them. So now I can start thinking, okay, based on that list of irresponsible people and the way they behave and all of that, what would his problems be? How would he see the world if he was in that point of view? How is he the hero, right? Because he probably thinks people are against him. How does he view himself in those situations? And from there, I'm going to start figuring out the biggest piece of all. And that's the piece that's going to help me figure out how this movie ends, which is, what does my protagonist need? Now, what a character wants and what a character needs should be two separate things. And they should be figured out, in my opinion, very early. Like, I may want $1 billion so I can buy a castle in the middle of nowhere, but what I need to learn is that money can't buy me happiness.
Oh, but it can, Tasha. It can buy you the castle, which will bring you happiness.
My happy ending is both. Or, in the case of this character at the museum that we're building, if we know now that his problem is being irresponsible, then the solution to his problem is learning the value of being responsible. So by the end of the movie, he should make a responsible choice. He should do the responsible thing to show that he's grown in the right direction because of the journey of the movie. So if we're building a want versus a need for someone like that, we might say, my protagonist wants to just lead a life the way he's leading it. He wants to be carefree. He wants no responsibility. He just wants to be left alone. But what he needs is to realize that responsibility will actually make his life more fulfilling, happier, easier. Okay? So now that I have a want and a need, I can get to the final step of all of this, which isn't really final at all, of course. You have a lot more work to do after this. But the final step that we'll talk about here on the podcast today is, now that I know my protagonist's wants versus needs, how do I visualize that? If my protagonist is irresponsible, and we've agreed upon that, and we've built that out, we know the psychology of it, we know how he feels and thinks about everything, his psychology. What is a scene where instantly the audience gets exactly who this guy is and what his problem of the movie is? And this is something we talk a lot about, Josh, on the podcast, of like how to open your characters in these really strong, powerful, really telling ways. And this is how we arrive at that scene. We can talk about for hours the best scenes out there of a character introduction, but unless you do this process and you know for yourself who your character is and more importantly where they grow to, then you'll know how to start them, right? You have to know how that character arcs to the end to know where they begin. And then once you have that, what is the punch you in the face version of that? I think the one that comes to mind instantly for me is Red One, most recently, just because the Chris Evans
Why though?
intro, because the Chris Evans intro, it's so on the nose and cliche, but it's exactly what we're talking about, right? They're trying to very quickly in a sequence set up who this guy is to the point where he literally steals candy from a baby. Okay. Again, on the nose, but this scene is designed to tell you that our protagonist is a selfish asshole who thinks only of himself with no regard for other people, which makes you excited inherently for the adventure of the movie because he is going to eventually come out the other side, the opposite of that. And now I'm excited to watch how the hell that's going to happen. And the good writing comes from surprising me along that journey and making me feel things. But I want to talk about that specifically because that brings to mind something else. I like to think of my protagonist as going from one opposite to another. And I'm talking as if that's for granted. But for me, this is very key to how I write. I think it's incredibly important. And I find it very fulfilling when I myself watch a TV show or a movie. Breaking Bad is a perfect example of something that feels very elevated, very not cliche, but is this. It's a character that goes from one opposite to the other. So where they start the movie, their status quo shouldn't be a great status quo, at least not for them, right? Like maybe they're living on a boring autopilot life where he doesn't stand up for himself, like a nobody. Or maybe they are just trying not to be noticed by their abusive family while living in a cupboard under the stairs, like in Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
And then what is the exact opposite of that starting point? It's becoming a confident wizard with a loving found family who can now stand up to his abusers. Or it's reigniting the badass fighter inside of him so that his life is exciting and he's protecting his family again. So it's a what am I
Like
trying to say?
Metamorphosis, transformation.
Yeah. I always think in those terms, which really helps you figure out what your beginning scene is.
Yeah.
So back to the point.
I was going to say, like, Night of the Museum is like what? No responsibility, unreliable, going to self-control, having responsibility.
Yeah.
It's
Accepting
someone,
responsibility. Yeah.
I always look at like a starting point for a character, and I think this was described to me at one point was you're consuming, someone who's consuming when you first meet them, and then by the end they're giving.
I like that a lot. That's a really cool way to articulate it.
I'd love to know who told me that. I wish I could say it was me, but
just say that.
I'll take the credit for it. But go.
Okay. So back to the point. My character is irresponsible. So what is the scene that's going to illustrate that the best? And if you're not sure what that is yet, that's okay. I think do more of the work we talked about above, right? Ask more questions, answer your own questions, dig in a little deeper. And some of your questions and answers might directly be about this. Like, is he a bad employee? Is that interesting? Write that on the board. Is he a bad husband? Do I want to talk about a failed marriage as part of my movie? TBD, maybe not. Is he a former criminal? Maybe. Is that where his irresponsibility lies? Do I want to deal with that storyline? Is he a bad father? Now, as part of this conversation, you may want to start asking yourself, who's the audience for this? And that may come into play and it may help guide you or it may not. You may want to ignore the audience altogether, which is totally fine. But in the case of Night at the Museum, I can almost guarantee you, and I think we've even talked about the backstory to this, that the father-son story was an add-on. Is that right, Josh? Do you remember that?
In Night at the Museum?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Okay. This is all hearsay because I'm not remembering the story.
That's
but I
so
feel like
important to the story. That'd be
it's
shocking
so
to
key.
me.
But again, it's part of this process, right? They maybe knew that they wanted an irresponsible person as that arc, but it wasn't until they realized who my audience is that I want kids to come to this movie. I want it to be a family movie where parents feel okay about bringing their children to it on a weekend, that I have to have the father-son story. I have to have a kid as one of my characters. Because let's say I made it about a former criminal or a bad husband. Like, a kid doesn't understand that. A kid can't really relate to that. They're not going to really enjoy that movie as much as the wish fulfillment of getting to see themselves and their father, their like father figure, going through this adventure, right? So that may be something that helps open you up, or it may be something that closes you off. So use it as you will. Okay, I've talked a lot. To sum up, you started with a location. You poked at that location. Why did it come to you? What inspired you about it? What about that original inspiration, meaning the essence of that inspiration in that location, can you take with you to start brainstorming what might happen in that space? And now that you have what might happen in that space, what is the best character to go through that space that best exemplifies that essence that you loved? And then think about, what does that character want versus what do they need? And then finally, how do you illustrate that want in an opening scene? Now, if memory serves, in Night at the Museum, I don't literally remember the exact opening scene, but I remember very clearly that he like goes to pick up his son, or he's late to do so. Like, he's not a great dad. We know that up front. And he's like very excited to get this new job because he's going to prove that he's a stable dad. But mom doesn't keep her hopes up.
I just want to also say that, you kind of touched on this, but it's so perfect to illustrate the father-son story throughout Night at the Museum. Like, he really does become more responsible. In the beginning, it's just pure chaos. And also something that's really smart that they did, which I think kind of lends to location, is you always have to ask yourself, like, why can't someone leave this location? And I think that actually kind of ties into the character, which in Night at the Museum, it's like, I don't want to leave because then I'm going to just lose another job and I'm just going to show my family that I'm a screw up.
Right. There's stakes there.
There's stakes at play. So that's something that's also really important. And yeah, that it's actually a brilliant movie because it like shows the transformation through him, taking control of a museum when it was just completely out of hand when you first meet him. It's awesome. Yeah,
he's like dealing with, I feel like we can get into act two, like understanding how to build an act two by breaking down how he grows in that movie. And maybe that's the follow through here is, brainstorm how you could potentially come to a Night at the Museum style movie if your location was the Natural History Museum. And then we can talk about, okay, well, how do you build an act two using Night at the Museum as a model? So what's cool about this, and this was not hard, right? You just make lists of things you care about and questions because you're a curious person, because you're a writer. And by the end of that process, which could just take you, I don't know, a couple hours maybe, max, you've come up with an opener and a character and a general story arc that you're going to write to. And that's pretty impressive for just starting with a location.
Yeah, just start building it out. That was beautiful. What a TED Talk.
Cool. So
I loved
great.
It. That was outstanding.
I want to say one last thing.
Yeah, please say two more.
Because you and I hate rules. So this is always the caveat to everything we talk about on this podcast. So I want to say, this is standard movie structure and thinking. Please think outside the box. You absolutely can buck the system, okay? That being said, even thinking of a movie like Mickey 17, which I just saw, which I talked about on the podcast the other day as being super original and very interesting, it also basically follows this structure and this arc. Mm-hmm. So even Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was lauded for being so fucking bonkers, follows this general structure and arc and way of thinking. So point being, know the system so that you can buck it when and where it's needed.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing is having the characters have a point of view, right? Yeah. Like, I think that is the key always. This is why you start with character and why we talk about character so much, which is really funny that we started with, this is why this is about location. Now it's full circle. Like, yeah, you should probably start with character. But
no. You can start with location and get to character. But you can't. There's no way character isn't key to the whole process.
Of course, you just can't have something in a museum without characters who have a certain point of view and flaws. It's just not happening. Then you're just watching people walk around the museum. It's like, okay, great. So, yeah, I loved everything you said.
It's so great. So in an upcoming episode, as Josh said, we're going to talk about what happens when you're the kind of writer who your story idea comes from a different place. It doesn't start with location. Maybe it starts with character. Maybe it starts with a scenario. Maybe it starts with the ending. A lot of people just know the ending of something. Yeah. They have no idea how to start from there. So that is our TED Talk for today.
This is, you know what, though? It highlights what I love about the creative process and screenwriting and writing in general is that there is no particular starting point that is correct. And this is why we've talked about this a million times, but you just highlighted it again. And we're going to talk about it in a different way. You know, it's like, it's just constantly evolving and there's no right way to do anything. It's just what works. It's just what works for you and how you get to certain points. It's beautiful.
And you could think of location for one thing, and then the next script you have, you thought of character first. It's so bonkers. It's so cool.
Yeah.
I'm a nerd
great.
for this kind of shit. Okay.
Same.
Quote of the day.
Yes.
Only put off until tomorrow what you are willing to die having left undone. Pablo Picasso. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram or on Twitter and Blue Sky, Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on Twitter, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.